Good day, everyone. This is Sir Vince. For this particular video, we'll be discussing how to write Chapter 4, the results and discussion of your research project. For our objectives, at the end of the session, the students are expected to number one, determine the purpose of Chapter 4. Number two, identify requirements before writing Chapter 4. And number three, distinguish the moves in writing Chapter 4. To begin, let's discuss what moves are in writing. Move analysis is a functional analysis of texts in which the analyst seeks to offer schemes that characterize the organization of the genre or a particular section of the genre. If you are writing emails, for example, you would have known that there is a certain expectation for you to write an email. This example of an email is practically anchored on the framework that structures the moves on how to write the email. For example, in starting the email, we begin with establishing the communication chain. Then, you start with an introductory sentence or paragraph that provides some information. You elaborate, probably by requesting information or favor, and practically end the communication. I will not be going through the steps or the specific actions that one can do in order to realize a move. But I guess if you pause this video, you would notice that once a move is actualized, there is a certain step that responds to it. Okay? Now let's apply this into your writing of chapter 4. Take note that in an IMRED text, chapter 4 pertains to the results section. However, the results section can have different variations. Look at this particular illustration here. Articles, however, may have a certain variation where it only discusses result separate from a discussion section and another section for conclusion. It can happen that there's a section for results, there's a section for discussion, but there's no conclusion. It can also happen that there is a mix of results and discussion and a separate conclusion section. Another option could be having results section and a separate discussions and conclusions section. In our context, what is more applicable is option 3. Our chapter 4 will tackle results and discussion, while chapter 5 will be discussing conclusions. To just give a recap, our particular research project uses the 5 chapter model, where we have introduction for chapter 1, literature review for chapter 2, methodology for chapter 3, this particular chapter for results and discussion, and chapter 5 for conclusion. Another chapter will be revisited when we write our chapter 4, but let's discuss that later. For now, let's take note of the purpose of chapter 4. The key purpose of this chapter is to present the findings from your investigation in a manner that enables the reader to understand with ease how they address your research questions. Remember that the results are the most important part of a research paper. Hence, as you write your chapter 4, it should be presented with a certain clarity and elaboration that allows the reader to recognize that you are already contributing to the academic discussion of your topic. In a manner of speaking, this is your initiation into the academic field because you are contributing to that field with the presentation of your findings. When we say that you have to present your findings, Of course, this should be related to your research questions. Not only should you be presenting your findings, but you also have to explain what the findings mean. Remember, the data does not speak for itself. Whenever you also discuss the particular findings, there should be a presentation of evidence wherein references back to details of methodology and background context are reiterated in order for you to be able to paint a picture that includes both the evidence, say in graph, figure, table format, and interpretations. Interpretations, which we also refer to as integrated discussions. We'll discuss this in a little while, but I hope we're able to identify or rather address the first objective. Let's now look at the requirements that we need to prepare before we write chapter 4. In a nutshell, these are the things that you have to prepare for. Number 1, tables, graphs, and or figures. Most of the time, students jump into writing chapter 4 without these things. So ensure that you are ready with your data summarized in these forms. Number 2, specific template required for the research design. In a separate video, I'll be discussing the particular flow of the discussion format in for chapter 4 rather. But in this video, I'll cover a general structure. And then chapter 2, or your literature review. Yes, if you think that you're done with this chapter, you probably are not. We'll discuss that in a while, but hopefully you have these things ready. For tables, graphs, and or figures, make sure that you have these after your data is completed. Make sure that data is well illustrated as well in visual format. The visualization of your data allows for better appreciation of your findings. I believe in a separate video, we've already tackled the importance of visual data in academic writing. The visualization of the results can include the following: profile of respondents. So it could be a table of who your survey respondents are, who your interview respondents are, or even a table or perhaps a flowchart of your process. For quantitative studies, we may have descriptive statistics of surveys, particularly showing ranks, as well as tables and graphs that would be derived from a statistical software. Interviews may require summary of themes, a table summary wherein you've already identified the quotes of the participants and identified certain codes for them. It would also be very helpful, especially for experimental setups, that you have pictures or images that would help your reader visualize your procedures. Sometimes you even have to go back to your methodology and add or replace certain figures there with actual pictures of the experimentation process. Now, for the specific template required for the research design, take note that normally chapter 4 is designed to answer the research questions. As I mentioned, in another video, I will be discussing nuances of templates for chapter 4 of quantitative and qualitative study. But for now, let's take a look at this particular guide. So we begin with for the quantitative study, an introduction that is more or less 100 words, basically just revisiting the purpose of your study so that your readers may be reminded of the aims of your study. Sometimes you can also provide some review of the methodology. There would also be a need for description of participants, especially if this is a survey. So you need to provide a demographic profile. Perhaps a table is needed for you to summarize who are the respondents. But generally, your description of this particular section should not go beyond 200 words. And then the meat of your discussion will be arranged based on your research questions. So if you have three research questions, there could be three major sections. However, depending on, say, variables being explored, there could be subtopics under the research question. For presentation of, say, a qualitative study, will require as well an introduction. This one will also be reviewing the readers of the purpose of the study and probably the methods, a description of the participants. A table may be needed for you to summarize their profiles. And the main discussion will be guided by the research questions. So major sections will be labeled based on your research questions. If you have certain themes developed per research question, these could be your subheadings, which are practically subtopics to discuss under the research question. The last requirement is chapter 2 or literature review. Take note that in chapter 4, you will discuss your study's findings with the findings from previous research mentioned in your literature review. Some students think that writing chapter 2 is finished or completed once you submit the proposal. However, it will be revisited, number one, because you have to go back to your reviewed literature and compare it with your findings. And number two, probably to update it. When I say update, sometimes there are findings that you have arrived at but is not supported by your current literature review. So what you try to do is add more literature. However, take note that in doing this, you will be adjusting the second chapter or the literature review once more. To facilitate things, maybe you could try what I use, an alignment matrix, or probably like scaffolds for writing. The scaffold will be considering or will be taking of the research questions and findings. These findings are practically rooted on the data or the presented data that you have. And then we also have literature or certain statements from your literature that support your particular finding. That can help in your discussion of your writing. For beginners, I just ask my students to practically have their findings and then interpretations. Later on, you can add a certain discussion um, column wherein you provide an explanation, evaluation, or implication. So take note of the distinctions of each particular concept. When we say explanation, we're trying to answer the question why this finding occurred as it did. So you try to give a cause. Evaluation of a result is all about meaning making. Remember, the data does not speak for itself. So, what meaning can you produce out of that one? Make sure, however, that that meaning is always anchored on your data. And finally, implication, where it shows some advanced or critical thinking on your end as it answers the question what do the results suggest? All throughout, please remember that you have to use hedging. Remember, in using hedging, you are number one, trying to be cautious, especially not to sound overconfident with your writing. And number two, allowing some room for corrections, for probably uh, debates or um, oppositions for your particular finding. Okay? Allow me to show you a simple sample of an alignment matrix. Okay, so I am sharing here an example of um, a scaffold for quantitative analysis, right? So we first made sure that we have uh, a table for profile of respondents, and then the descriptives, right? And in another document, we had the statistical information. And note that in this case, we also tried to have the findings from the quantitative study related to the qualitative aspect of the study. And then we um, looked for relative, or rather related literature that could be used to practically discuss the findings later on. So do not pressure yourself into writing the implications, evaluations, explanations just yet. You will probably recognize that as you write. And then I'm also sharing in this particular document an example of a qualitative um, scaffold. All right, so this one practically begins with the themes and the codes, the frequencies. So here we're trying to support each theme with the quotes from the participants and also some literature already. Okay, so do try to create something like this in your study so that it can facilitate your writing. Again, this serves as a structural guide for you to write your paper. Okay, that's it with the identification and the requirements for chapter 4. Let's now move forward to the distinction or distinguishing of the moves when writing chapter 4. So there are practically four moves. Number one, present metatextual information, where we try to revisit the research aim or the methodology, or we also have the option to provide overview of results. Okay, so this is how you sort of like introduce your paper. Move 2 is largely responsible for the major parts of your chapter 4. So here you invite readers to view your results by referring to tables and figures, and then mentioning the specific or key results in detail with or without explanations. So this may be depending if you have an integrated result and discussion paper or separated. In our case, we'll have with explanations already. You also would be comparing your findings with results in other research, hence the need to share or review the RRL. And if you are doing more advanced writing, you can also compare with model predictions. But it's okay if you just focus on the first three. Now, move three is mentioning the problems probably of uh, your research. Okay, so this will, however, be reiterated in chapter 5. As for chapter 4, possible implications of results would also be elaborated further in chapter 5. So notice that um, the font size here is much smaller only because chapter 4 focuses more on moves 1 and 2, and move 3 and move 4 can somehow be revisited in chapter 5. Okay, to see how the moves are employed, we'll be discussing this particular text. You can pause this clip to read this particular part, no? But take note of the following. This is an example results section from a text or an article titled A Modeling Approach to Traffic Management and Carbon Monoxide Exposure During Peak Hours. It's okay if the subject matter is not familiar to you. Okay? I want you to only focus on the intention of the writer for structuring certain parts of the text. Okay? And take note, this is a general approach in writing chapter 4. So Regardless if you're having quantitative, qualitative, or experimental research, most of the time this will be the writing structure, writing flow when you're doing the results and discussion. Okay, so so again we'll explore this text here. Okay, and I'll divide this into four sections. The first section is from sentences 1 to 5. The second section 6 to 7. The third section 8 to 10, and the last section 11 to 13. Okay, so again, it's okay if you're not very familiar with the subject matter. Just take note of what are the intentions of the writer when writing certain sentences. Okay, so let's have here sentences 1 to 5. You can pause this clip. Okay, now let's see. Let's try to answer this particular question. From sentences 1 to 2, what do you think is the writer trying to say in this segment? Pause this clip to take note of your answer first. So one, two, or three. Okay. So the correct answer here is that the writer refers to the findings and conclusions obtained by other researchers. So notice that this particular intention is realized in the terms data obtained in previous studies and then a reference to previous studies like according to Figo et al. Right? So the writer in this case began his writing of the discussion, or at least a part of the discussion, by citing other studies first. Remember, however, you have other options. You can start with your research aim or probably give an overview of the results. But in this case, the writer opted to refer to findings of other researchers. Okay, so let's take note, okay, that there are certain ways for us to begin uh, the discussion of the theme or discussion of a major section in your chapter 4. You can begin by offering an overview of the current section. You can begin by referring back to something from the previous sections. But sometimes, although this was already advised earlier, when you describe your results already, the readers might need a certain build up of your discussion of the results. So, having smooth transitions by following these tips can provide a better writing flow. Okay, like say for example, um, your research questions. So if your research questions are revisited, it can help your readers to be more familiar with what you will be discussing. Now let's head on to sentences 3 and 4. So what do you think is the writer trying to study or trying to say in this particular segment? You can pause this clip. And okay, so here note that the writer is trying to refer back to his or her own methodology and adds more information about it. So as mentioned earlier, we try to have a build up of our results first. So do not jump into your results, but provide a certain um, contextualization of your particular explanation of the findings. Okay, so you may decide to refer to or summarize your methodology in your opening sentences. So this can be done for you to highlight the important aspect of, say, materials, equipment, or methodology that was used to obtain your results. In our case, we'll also be introducing some profile of respondents if applicable for your study. Now, let's have this particular sentence here now. What do you think is the writer trying to say in this segment? You can pause this clip to try and answer. Okay, so the correct answer here is that the writer invites the reader to look at the graph, figure, table. So, how do we say that the writer is trying to do that? The writer says figure 1 shows the results. So, with this particular statement, the reader will be instructed to look at figure 1. So, it's very important for you to provide labels for your table, so number them correctly. Otherwise, your particular reader might be confused. If you're wondering why there is a need to still invite the reader to look, so remember that the data in many figures, tables, and photographs can be interpreted in more than one way. So, in that case, you should comment on the results in that figure before you invite the reader to take a look. Okay, so the data does not speak for itself, basically. So, you have to be able to help them make sense out of the information. In a separate video, I discussed the difference between tables and figures. So, I hope you remember them. Okay, now let's head on to sentences 6 to 7. What do you think is the writer trying to say in sentence number 6? You can pause this clip and try to answer. Okay, here in this sentence, the writer refers to specific results. So, how do we say that the writer is specifying a result? It says during morning peak time journeys, the carbon monoxide concentrations for car passengers were significantly lower. So, the time frame indicates a specific result. The mention of significantly lower as a description is providing a subjective and evaluative language. We also get to note that the writer is comparing his findings with another study because there is a reference for a certain, or rather, there is a citation for a certain study, and there is a mention that the finding that he had is consistent with another finding. Likewise, you can also have some uh, contradicting findings being juxtaposed. Okay, so you may also, if you want to highlight some contradictions, you may say, this is in contrast to the study of. Okay, the importance of comparing your results with those from other researchers is that you are able to show the reader how and where your results fit, or rather fit in with the existing research picture. It's very important that you remember your results are the most important parts of your study. You have to be able to place this, or to provide a certain space for this one in the academic discussion. Hence, you have to make comparisons and perhaps contrast that you may be able to distinguish where your results fare in terms of the previous literature. If you're wondering where you get the findings that you will be comparing with yours, as mentioned earlier, it's from your literature review. So take note, however, while it does not require that you check your finding with each and every article, choose at least 3 articles per instance of comparison or contrast. Okay? So if you only choose one, I think that will provide an insufficient discussion because you probably have explored several articles. You should be able to see that your study has certain comparisons or probably contradictions with several studies, not just one. Okay? So you also might be wondering how to present your results. So try to focus on the more important things. Again, I'm speaking in the context of, say, a sub themes. All right. Let's say, for example, in a when you're discussing the descriptives of your, say, ranked data from a survey, begin with the most important first. Okay, and then the least important sometimes may not even be covered. So the most important results should be the ones that must be given highlights. Okay, so if you're wondering why you need to use evaluative language, take note that the results do not speak for themselves. So you have to guide your reader in how to interpret a certain finding. However, sometimes you may give an objective evaluation by providing numbers. But take note that the comments you make will influence the way readers perceive them. Like in this example, if you want a reader to focus on similarities, you may mention that, say, the data seems very similar. But if you say, for example, the data or the curves are noticeably different, the reader will try to focus on the difference. So here, your voice as a writer is now influencing your reader. It is done in a way that you focus on certain information and you choose certain words on how to describe them. Now let's talk about sentence 7. Okay, so what do you think is the writer trying to say in this particular section? Okay, so this section shows us that the writer offers a general statement about his or her results to begin a new paragraph. So why do we say that this is a statement to begin a new paragraph? This is actually, if you can recall earlier, that the last sentence in the first paragraph of the text. So you probably would think of this as a transition sentence. So in this sentence, the writer is moving on to more interesting controversial results and does so by providing a signal word. However, how do you know which one is an interesting or controversial result? It's up to you as the writer. Unless otherwise you do not you cannot tell which one is a significant or interesting result. Your writers may just perceive everything as having the same function and importance. So, in exploring sentences 8 to 10, let's see what could be the controversial information. Try to guess what the writer is trying to say in this segment. So, you pause this clip and let's try to see. So, this time around, the writer refers to specific results. So, referring to the mean of the concentrations and compares them ob- to those obtained in another study by citing a particular study from Figo et al. And then take note of the use of a language that comments on the result. So, striking difference. Signals are more useful when they occur early in the sentence. So, the way that you also position information could help influence how your writers, again, perceive the result. Let's now head on to sentences 9 to 10. What do you think is the writer trying to say in this particular statement? So again, the writer selects specific results to describe in more detail using language that comments on the results. So I think we have here information from the first hour, okay, and then providing certain description considerably lower. So the use of certain modifiers can help your readers appreciate better the meaning of um, your information. If you're wondering if you should explain your results as you present them, of course you should. Explanations can be given by providing background factual information. So be able to tell once more the difference of explanation, evaluation, and implication. So when you are commenting on the particular finding, so augment or rather add a particular statement that explains why the result happened. So try to think of a cause. What could be the cause of this particular um, finding? Then provide the implication. No, so I think this is when we give the evaluative language and do provide an implication of the result. So what does it suggest? What do you think can happen if, say, a particular finding is observed in a certain manner? Now let's explore the last three sentences of the text. So you can pause this clip so that you can read further. In sentence 11, what do you think is the writer trying to say in this segment? Let's see. Here, the writer refers to the method used to analyze the results. So, how do we say that there's a reference to the method? So, the term probably quantitative analysis, so determine modeling uncertainties based on maximum deviation. of the measured and calculated levels. So these particular terms refer to the use of a method. However, take note that sometimes these kinds of information are not found in the methodology. The results, as mentioned earlier, can sometimes provide information that elaborates on the methodology, like, say, for example, a description of the profile of the respondents. So it's okay that your methodology may seem to be revisited from time to time and given additional information. Okay, so what do you think is the writer trying to say in sentence 12? Here, the writer mentions a problem in the results and uses quantity language to minimize its significance. What do you think is the writer trying to do? Is he trying to sabotage his study by mentioning a problem? Is it that going to make his um, study probably doubted? Actually, that's an admission of some limitation on your end. No research is perfect. In this case, the particular writer is saying that there's a certain uncertainty that can be expected as based on a certain model prediction. However, that limitation is mitigated with the use of the term slightly. Okay, slightly exceeds the 50% acceptability. Okay, so even if there's an admission of the problem, you have to try to minimize the significance of that particular problem. Okay, so don't ignore problems in your results unless they're insignificant or invisible. When you talk about your problems in your results, however, minimize the problem and suggest possible reasons for it and offer a solution moving forward. So, in the example that we provided, for example, the use of the term slightly was a way to minimize the effect of the problem. Now, let's talk about the last sentence here. What is the writer trying to say in this particular segment? Here, the writer makes a reference to the implications and applications of the work he or she has done. Remember that in the last sentence, the writer was just talking about the problems of his study, admitting to a certain weakness or limitation. But he does not end his discussion by sabotaging his research. Instead, he puts forward the importance of his study still. This can be gleaned in the term the results suggest that the data may provide more sensitive information for assessing the impact of traffic management. Basically, the writer is saying that yes, there was a problem, but there is a certain contribution gleaned from this study of mine. So it's very important, however, that you try to sort of like keep these things more like a preview only. What do I mean? Failing to mention a problem suggests that you aren't sufficiently expert to be aware of uh, the limitation, and this could be having a negative effect on your professional authority. However, limit the description of the problem to short descriptions only. This will, however, provide you an essential element for the next chapter or the conclusions chapter, some directions or suggestions for future research. To this end, we are summarizing here the descriptions or the descriptions that were gleaned from the analysis of the text. And we're able to paint a picture of how each sentence was able to contribute or correspond to the moves that were used to discuss chapter or a particular section of chapter 4. So please take note that when you write a certain topic or a certain theme under chapter 4, take note of the moves. Okay? Present metatextual information first, present the results, and mention problems with your results, but end with implications of your results. I hope that this video has helped you achieve the following objectives. to determine the purpose of Chapter 4, identify its requirements, and distinguish the moves that are used in writing Chapter 4. To help you reflect on this session, answer the following questions. What difficulties do you anticipate in writing Chapter 4, and how will you resolve this? What skills or values are developed in writing Chapter 4? And what is the significance of writing Chapter 4? I hope the objectives will translate into your writing of Chapter 4, and hopefully this video provided a helpful discussion for you to be able to contribute to the field that you're most interested in.